Hey friends, it's Megan, and today I'm inviting you to go back in time with me to the 1960s, also known as the Swinging Sixties. Just in case you are looking for like really cool hippy dippy names, that's not what this video is. This is really more about names that were popular during this decade. But I will link in the description box down below a link to a video I did on whimsical names and nature names that kind of feel like hippie kid names a little bit in a good way. But yeah, I just wanted to let you know that. This video though, what I did is I've got 10 names for girls and 10 for boys that were pretty popular during the 1960s. We'll pick our favorites of those. I invite you to comment your favorites. And then we'll look at what the top 10 names for each gender actually was in the 60s and kind of compare that to previous decade. So let's go back to the 60s and start with the girls' names. First up on my list, I have Lisa. Lisa was the #1 name in the 1960s. It is now currently 773 in popularity here in the United States. And if there was a girl's name of the 60s, Lisa was it. Because like I said, it was the #1 name during this era. Lisa is a diminutive of the name Elizabeth, which means pledge to God. And Lisa was a top 10 name in the US from 1959 up until 1976. So it definitely held its own there for a little bit. But Lisa really did start declining in the early 1990s. Then we have Donna. Donna also feels very 50s and 60s-esque. Donna was #8 in the 60s. It's now no longer in the top 1,000, and it hasn't been in the top 1,000 since 2010. It's an Italian name meaning lady, and there were a lot of Donalds during this time, a lot of Donalds the previous like 30 years. So I suspect a lot of Donnas were named for their fathers, and Donna was in the top 50 from 1929 up until 1972. Next on my list we have Tammy. Tammy was #13. Crazy that it was so popular then because it is no longer in the top 1,000 either. Fell out of the top 1,000 in 1998. And it comes from an old Hebrew name meaning palm tree. Most common, or this name was most popular in the 1960s. It was in the top 50 in the US from 1958 up until 1976. I would definitely be surprised to meet a little Tammy now, but I wouldn't be surprised to meet one in her, around 50 years old. Then we've got Lori. Lori all on its own was #15 in popularity. Another name no longer in the top 1,000. And it hasn't been in the top 1,000 since 2001. Lori is a diminutive of names like Laura or Lorraine, or any names with lore in them basically, and it means bay laurel. And it was in the top 50 from 1957 up until 1976. So you can kind of see I'm giving these to kind of give you an idea of like what generations these names really kind of represent. Next we have Julie. Julie was #18 then. It is now #404. It's a French form of the name Julia, which I really love, meaning youthful. And it was very, very in the 1960s and 70s. It was in the top 100 from 1951 all the way up until 1991. Then we have Angela. Angela was #22 in the 60s. It's now #196. So it's dropped a bit, but it's still very current. I mean, at 196, it's definitely a name you still hear here in the US. It doesn't sound like a mom name or so generational like some of these do. It's Latin and it means angel. Wildly popular in the 60s and 70s. And Angela was popular for a good chunk. It was in the top 100 from 1956 up until 2002. Next we have Teresa with this spelling. Teresa is #25 in the 60s. It's now #657. And with this spelling, it is a Spanish name meaning to harvest. It reminds me of many saints' names, namely Mother Teresa. And Teresa was in the top 100 in the US from 1948 up until 1981. Then we have Denise. Denise was #29 in the 60s, now #760. I actually know a good chunk of women that have Denise as a middle name. Denise is a French feminization of the name Dennis, and Dennis comes from the name of the Greek god in Greek mythology, Dionysus, and it was in the top 50. Denise was in the top 50 from 1951 up until 1973. Then we have Dawn. Dawn was number 37 in the 60s, now not in the top 1,000. Hasn't been in the top 1,000 since 2000. And it's kind of interesting. We had Donna and now we have Dawn. Very similar sound there. Dawn is a word name. It means beginning of a new day. And Dawn is a name I think many people would associate like with as being a name of a hippie or something. And then the last name I wanted to delve into for girls was Jacqueline. Jacqueline was number 51 in the 60s and is now number 239. This name can be pronounced so many ways. I like the lean ending, Jacqueline, Jacqueline, Jacqueline. Those are just a couple examples. It's very current. I can definitely see this name rising again. I think it just took a little dip and will come back. It sounds like a lot of names people are liking. So let's briefly I'll run over this list again and we can pick our favorites. I invite you to comment what your favorites are, or what you think of any of these names in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think. So we had Lisa, Donna, Tammy, Lori, Julie, Angela, Teresa, Denise, Dawn, and Jacqueline. My favorite of these names is probably Julie. I really like Julia, so but I think Angela is nice as well. I don't know, I'm not super in love with any of these, but those would probably be my picks. Okay, now let's look at the boys' names of the decade. First up, we have to talk about Michael. So Michael was number 1 in the 1960s, and it is now number 7. It's a Hebrew name meaning who is like God. And do you have some Michaels in your family? I bet that you do. Most people in the United States probably do, and here's why. Michael has been in the top 10 in the US since 1943, and the lowest since names have been recorded in this country that it's been is number 57. It is my dad's name, other relatives, my brother's middle name. So definitely running strong in my family, and I'm sure many of yours. Then we have David, another one I bet you have a lot. You might have some in your family tree. David was the number 2 boy's name in the 60s. It is now number 18. Not that big a drop for Michael or David. Many of these boys' names you'll see on this list are still very current, definitely still being used, which is interesting because so many of the girls' names had left the top 1,000. David's a Hebrew name meaning beloved, nice meaning, and it was in the top 10 from 1936 all the way up until 1992. David has never been lower than 32, spot 32 in the charts in the United States. I thought that was interesting. I knew it was a classic popular name. I didn't know it was that popular. Then we have Mark. Mark was number 6 in the 60s. It is now number 184. It's Latin meaning warlike. It did peak in the 60s. It was in the top 20 from 1951 up until 1975. Next we have Jeffrey. I loved this name when I was a little kid. I named various Cabbage Patch dolls Jeffrey. Jeffrey was number 10 in the 1960s. It's now number 256. It means pledge to God. It's a variation of the name Jeffrey with a G, and it was in the top 20 from 1955 up until 1978. Then we have Timothy. Timothy was number 13 in the 60s, now number 125, and it's a Greek name meaning honoring God, wildly popular for a long time. So Timothy was in the top 50 for boys in the US from 1948 up until 1999. Then we have Kevin. Kevin was number 14 in the 60s. It's now number 72, still pretty current. It's an Irish name meaning handsome. I know this is a name my parents considered using for my little brother, and it's been in the top 100 since 1949. So from 1949 till present, Kevin has been in the top 100. I thought that's kind of interesting. Then we've got Scott. Scott was number 15 in the 60s. It's now number 428. It's an English or Scottish surname, and it may mean from Scotland or a Gaelic speaker. And it was in the top 50 from 1953 up until 1988. Next up is Todd. Todd was number 31 in the 60s. Now barely in the top 1,000. It's number 966. It's English and it means fox. I think that's cute meaning. Todd has like this surfer skater feel to me. Very big in the 1960s and 70s. Todd was in the top 100 from 1959 up until 1985. Then we have Troy. I can see people loving this name again. It was number 55. It's now number 275. And it may refer to the ancient city of Troy. It may also come from an Irish name meaning foot soldier. It was in the top 100 in the 1960s and 70s. Very popular during that time. And like I said, I think Troy, people are loving names like Roman, maybe Troy. Get the theme there? Okay, and then the last name I kind of wanted to delve into here today is Dean. Dean was number 88. It is now number 238. It's an English name meaning church official. Dean always sounds good with like any name as a middle name, almost any name. I just think it works well. A lot of like one syllable boys' names work well with longer first names. And Dean is actually slowly going up in popularity the last couple years. It was in the top 100 from the mid-50s all the way through the 1960s. Let's quickly review and pick our favorites. So, a lot of these are men in my family. We had Michael, David, Mark, Jeffrey, Timothy, Kevin, Scott, Todd, Troy, and Dean. My favorite from this list, I like Timothy. There's something sweet about Timothy. And then probably Dean would be my second because I do think it makes a nice middle name. I'd love to hear what your favorites are in the comments below. But let's now look at what the most popular names of the 60s actually were, the top 10 for each sex. So for girls, the number 1 was Lisa, 2, Mary, 3, Susan, 4, Karen, 5, Kimberly, 6, Patricia, 7, Linda, 8, Donna, 9, Michelle, and 10, Cynthia. So we had a couple of names, 4 names jump off the list from the 1950s and 4 jump on into the 1960s. So off the list, names that had previously been in the top 10 last decade were Deborah and Deborah, Barbara and Nancy. Those left, and so they made room for Lisa, which jumped all the way, wasn't in the top 10 and jumped to number 1. Kimberly, Michelle, and Cynthia all entered the top 10. For boys, we had less movement. We only had 1 change, but the top 10 names were 1, Michael, 2, David, 3, John, 4, James, 5, Robert, 6, Mark, 7, William, 8, Richard, 9, Thomas, and 10, Jeffrey. So the one change that happened is that Charles left the top 10 and that made room for Jeffrey to enter. So there's 2 names that were in the top 10 then and now, and those are William and Michael. Very, very classic. There are multiple ones in my family, on both sides of my family actually. So yeah, I'd love to hear what you think of any of these names. Are your parents' names on this list? Some of mine, or one of mine is. Yeah, I hope you are all having a wonderful day. Look forward to reading your comments. I'll see you in the next decade. Bye-bye.